My name is Jan Santerre. I am the Urban Forestry Program Coordinator at the Maine Forest Service, here within the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I'll just be moderating and emceeing the program this morning. We've got a pretty healthy registration of folks, so hopefully you'll get something out of this. Let's see. Just some housekeeping reminders. If you are not registered yourself under your own name and with your email, you're in a room with others, or if by chance you pop up in the attendee list as a telephone number, if you would please just drop your name into the chat so that we can verify your attendance, particularly for those who are expecting pesticide or forestry credits. We are qualified for 1 pesticide credit today and 1.5 forester licensing credits. And for those of you who are also expecting credits, we do have a quiz. You have to complete that quiz in order to receive the credits, receive verification. And that quiz will be open until midnight tomorrow. Amy Emery, who's also helping to moderate this, will drop the link to the quiz, I believe, in the chat. Again, just keep your mics muted if you're not speaking. Cameras off, if you would, please. And let's see. I think that's it. Any questions you have, you can drop those into the chat. You can raise your hand. We will wait until after folks are done speaking before we take any questions, and we'll take questions after each one of the speakers, ideally. So we will get started. First up on the agenda to talk about the EAB situation in New Hampshire, we have Bill Davidson from the New Hampshire Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, their Division of Forest and Lands. So take it away, Bill.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'll share my screen and I'll just give a quick presentation on kind of the situation of emerald ash borer in New Hampshire and talk about some of the programs and projects that we have going on that we're implementing to try and deal with this problem. All right, so I guess first of all, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, yeah, so this is our current management map, locations where we found emerald ash borer. So last winter we found it for the first time in Coos County, so that's the farthest north county. So we now have emerald ash borer in all 10 of our counties, so it's pretty prevalent throughout the state. And the very northern part of the state has just not a lot of ash. So the vast majority of the ash resource in New Hampshire is now impacted. And you can kind of see we first found it in 2013 in the Concord area. And so this is, I'll go into presentation mode. Okay, there we go.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah. I was going to remind you of that. And actually, sorry, one more housekeeping thing. We're required to say that this meeting is being recorded. I'm sorry that I forgot to say that at the beginning.
All right, no worries. Okay, yeah, so Concord, this is Concord here, kind of the center of the state. So we found emerald ash borer here for the first time in 2013. And you can kind of see that it's radiated pretty consistently, maybe like 1 or 2 towns per year outside, from that Concord area. And so we're currently at the point where the closer you get to that initial infestation, the farther along the kind of infestation has progressed to the point where these like dark orange and lighter orange colors, now all these towns are what we consider like aftermath forest, where you go into the forests around in these towns and you'd be really hard pressed to find any healthy ash. You can maybe find a few stragglers hanging on here and there. And then maybe in this light green band that's where it's starting to peak. You're seeing a lot of woodpecker damage, a lot of blonding. There's still trees alive, but they're rapidly declining. And then once you get to the periphery, so these dark green, that's where we just found it in the last couple of years. You can maybe find some damaged trees that have noticeable woodpecker damage here or there, but we haven't really started to see extensive decline in those areas yet, but we're expecting that to happen in the next, year or two. And so kind of the main long-term management option that we've been implementing is the APHIS biocontrol program. And so this isn't anything new. It's been around for 2 decades at this point. Pretty much every state in the eastern US, or I guess now the western states too, pretty much every state that has emerald ash borer is participating in this program. We did our first releases in 2014, so 1 year after we found emerald ash borer. And we've now released at, I think, up to 28 sites. So each of these red dots on the map is location where we've released the parasitic wasps as part of the biocontrol program. And we have 2 new locations approved for this year. Those aren't on this map, but they're going to be up in Grafton County, which is this county here. And so we're now at the point where we've gone back and looked at these some of the past release sites to try and evaluate them for the presence and the establishment of the wasps that we released. And pretty much everywhere we look, we've been able to find at least the 2 larval parasitoids. So for anyone that's not familiar, there's 3 species of wasps that we release as part of this program. 2 of them are what are called larval parasitoids, which means that the wasps lay their eggs inside of the emerald ash borer larva, and then the wasp larvae consume the emerald ash borer larva. And they're larger. I mean, they're still pretty small insects, but of the 3 species, they're larger than the 3rd species, which is called what's known as an parasitoid. So it's a wasp that lays its eggs inside of an emerald ash borer egg. It's super tiny. It's like less than a millimeter. That one we haven't found as consistently. We have found it, but not at every site. And I think that's mostly because it's just so small and difficult to detect. It does seem we found it, at wide-ranging sites throughout the state. So I think it is establishing and spreading. It's just much more difficult to find. But so we're actually pretty encouraged with how this program's going, and with some of the research coming out from people looking into the effectiveness of the parasitic wasps. I know Jean Duan, who is one of the main researchers who's been looking at this stuff, has found pretty high rates of parasitization in the Midwest, and so we don't see any reason why that wouldn't also be the case in New Hampshire. And it kind of lines up with what we've been seeing at some of these sites that we've evaluated. So we're pretty encouraged about this program moving forward. Another program that we just started on last year is kind of looking for tolerant ash. So we're now just getting to the point around the Concord area, like I mentioned, where we're starting to enter that aftermath phase where there's not very many live trees left. So now we can go into the forest, and if we do see healthy trees, we can assume that they have at least some degree of tolerance. So as far as I'm aware, there's not really any resistant trees out there, but there's what researchers have kind of coined lingering ash. So trees that for some reason, either physiologically or chemically or just kind of, I don't know, some other reason, aren't as susceptible to emerald ash borer, and so they live longer. So I think we've been working with the Ecological Research Institute out of New York, and they have set some criteria where I think their definition is if you have trees that show little to no damage in a forest where over 90% of the ash are dead, you can kind of consider that tree lingering. And so we're trying to identify some of these trees, and once we identify them, we can collect scion materials, so twig samples, and we'll send them into researchers who will then grow that scion material out and breed it with other lingering trees to try and produce more tolerant offspring. And so this picture here, this is an example of a green ash in Concord. This picture was taken last year, less than a mile from the first detection. So like the very first detection in New Hampshire, this is less than a mile from that. And you can see there's no woodpecker damage on this tree. It's got a completely full canopy. And so I was pretty shocked when I walked into the forest and saw this. But so this is the type of tree that we're looking for. And this is the website for the Ecological Research Institute. They came and gave a workshop at our field office here last summer, and their kind of goal is to they've developed a protocol for doing different types of surveys and setting up monitoring plots that are really pretty minimal in terms of time investment and technical expertise that you need to do them. And so it's really something anybody can do. I think you need to have a forest with at least 40 ash trees, live or dead. And you just go and check them every year and look for healthy trees. And so if you're interested in participating in this program, this is their website here. They have all their protocols listed on their websites. So we have a few of these monitoring sites set up throughout the state, and I'll be checking them every year and kind of monitoring the health of the trees, looking for these lingering trees. And then for more short-term control, we've implemented kind of a network of chemically treated trees, or like plots of treated trees throughout the state. And so the end goal of this project is to kind of chemically protect clusters of about a dozen trees of kind of exemplary ash stands throughout the state at 100 sites. So ideally get something like 10 of these sites per county, treat a dozen trees at each site. And that way we're retaining some of the local genetic diversity, and the trees that we're treating are ideally kind of mature, healthy trees that have nice canopy position and hopefully are, kind of in the prime of their life, producing a lot of seed. In addition to kind of preserving some of that local genetic diversity, we're also hoping to jumpstart the seed bank and kind of increase the rate that ash can reincorporate into the forest following the wave of emerald ash borer that's going to move through. And so the tree, we use amectin benzoate as the chemical it's a systemic trunk injected pesticide, and it's effective for at least 3 years. And so the end goal is to kind of have 33 sites that we're treating on a 3-year cycle. So treating a third of the sites every year. This is our map. I think we're up to 88 sites this year, and the remaining 20 or so sites are going to be added into the northern part of the state as emerald ash borer makes its way up there. And so each dot represents a treatment site, so about a dozen trees at each site, and the color just represents the last year that it was treated. And so you can see there's a 3-year cycle. So each color gets, one color is going to get treated every year. And then another thing that we just kind of opportunistically took advantage of, I know in 2022, it just happened to be a really good ash. It was a great ash mast seed year. And so this is something I tried to do when I first started back in like 2016. I think 2017 was a really good ash seed year, and I collected a bunch of seeds and was hoping to plant them out, and stored the seeds in bags in our lab over the weekend and came back and they had all been destroyed by mice. And so I was like, all right, I'll just wait till the next ash seed year. And I was waiting 6 years from 2017 till 2022 until there was a good seed year again. And so because 2022 was such a good seed year, I was able to go around the state into forests kind of close to where in the same region that they were collected from, and hopefully, get some nice areas with ash regeneration. Again, trying to jumpstart that next generation of ash after emerald ash borer moves through. And so this is kind of what the process looked like. We were able to collect these seeds. This is planting them out in the fall of 2022 at our state nursery, and this was last spring to germinate. And so that seems like it's been going pretty well. They're not quite big enough this year to plant back out, so we're hoping next year, when the seedlings are 2 years old, they'll be big enough that we can move them back out into the forest. And so one of the things I get asked probably most frequently is kind of what's the future of ash in our forests? And, I mentioned all these different management programs that we've got going on, the chemical control, the biocontrol, the um, tolerance breeding, and the seedling planting. And so at this point, it's really hard to say what is ultimately going to happen. There is, I think the most encouraging thing that I've seen is the progress with the biological control and how that's been progressing in areas in the Midwest and areas that have had emerald ash borer longer, where, like I mentioned, researchers are starting to see really high rates of parasitization in these aftermath forests. So like after emerald ash borer moves through and kills all of the large standing trees, we're kind of left with a situation where there's lots of, maybe 3 inch and smaller seedlings and saplings that aren't preferred by emerald ash borer, or, in the case of the seedlings, are actually too small for emerald ash borer to attack. But EAB doesn't go away completely. It kind of persists on those small trees as they slowly grow into sizes that they can attack. And so EAB sticks around at a low level. There's low density of ash on the landscape. And so because there's not such huge populations of beetles, the wasps are able to seemingly have a meaningful controlling effect, at least to some degree. And so I know in areas in the Midwest, they have seen some areas where some of these small trees have grown into maybe like 5 or 6 inch trees at this point and are still healthy and alive. And so I think that's kind of what we can expect in this region as well. And I know the tree breeding isn't a fast process, as anyone familiar with the American chestnut breeding program knows. It's something that can take decades, but it is in the works. And hopefully through the efforts of the researchers doing these breeding programs, along with just kind of natural processes selecting for maybe some slightly more tolerant trees, future generations of ash might be populated by slightly hardier trees when that's combined with the kind of pressure of the parasitoids. It doesn't seem like at this point ash is going to be going extinct like we once thought it might be, but might be survive kind of scattered on the landscape. And this is just a quick kind of simple guide for what we recommend to people that ask what they should, how they should manage their ash. And obviously it's going to depend on their forest and what their goals are for their forest, and how many ash they have and how big they are. And I mean, there's not really any one size fits all solution. But really what we recommend is just kind of have a plan ready before emerald ash borer gets into your forest. Know if you're going to harvest or not, what the pros and cons are to harvesting or leaving the trees. Are you trying to extract the most monetary value that you can? Are your trees in areas where they're going to be potentially hazards, like close to houses or roads or along walking trails, stuff like that? The benefits of leaving ash, potentially leaving tolerant trees, leaving a seed source. They also serve as kind of a for the biological controls to become established, and that sort of thing. And so I think, yeah, that's all I've got for this presentation. So I don't know if I've got time for questions or anything like that.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. If folks have questions, they can certainly drop them in the chat. I'm not seeing anything at this time. Allison, you can weigh in here too as our timekeeper. If folks wanted to come off mute real quick to ask a question, that's if you raise your hand, we could do that. But otherwise, I would say thank you, Bill. I should have led with, New Hampshire is a few years ahead of Maine. The first detection there again, Bill, was what year?
2013 was our first detection.
Okay, and I believe, Allison, correct me if I'm wrong again, or Mike, 2018 was our first detection. So I mean, a few years ahead, and the reason that we've invited these folks here from New Hampshire is, we love to learn from our neighbors, and this is a great opportunity to see how the state of New Hampshire is responding in various different capacities, being that you are slightly ahead of us as far as the the biological curve of invasion for EAB. Really like seeing pictures of your nursery. We're envious. We don't have a state nursery here in
Yeah.
Maine, even though our state nursery has been closed for, I think, 40 to maybe even 50 years. I still get questions on an annual basis about how to get trees from our state nursery. And what I do is I call AJ Dupree, my counterpart, one of my counterparts in New Hampshire, and we get trees from New Hampshire. So, we do cooperate a lot. And in the spirit of cooperation, I want to introduce our to next speaker. Oh, actually, sorry. One question here. How effective are over-the-counter drench treatments? How harmful are those treatments to other insects, bees, and birds?
So in general, we've used so the drench treatments I'm familiar with, like the soil drenches, I think those are usually imidacloprid-based products, which they are labeled for emerald ash borer. When I've used them, they have not been that effective. So I've treated trees that were perfectly healthy and still ended up dying, maybe a little bit slower, but they still ended up dying to emerald ash borer. And they need to be applied annually as opposed to every 3 or 4 years, like the emamectin benzoate that we use. So I really wouldn't recommend using anything other than emamectin benzoate based and like trunk injected products.
Thanks, Bill. That's been our MO as far as responding to that question too. All right, so we'll move on. We're now going to talk about the management of EAB within the utility corridor in New Hampshire. Many folks on the call are from municipalities. We've got quite a few on here also from corresponding utilities here in Maine. As I said, it's all about cooperation and collaboration. Municipalities are going to have to partner with their utilities and private citizens in order to address management of ash within the rights of way in general. So we've got Ian Farley and Rick Sullivan, who are both on from Eversource in New Hampshire. Rick is the supervisor of distribution and vegetation management for Eversource and has been with the company for over 15 years. He has a BA of biology from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's worked both in New Hampshire as well as down in Connecticut, and was in Connecticut when they first were starting to see EAB there. Ian is a manager of distribution and vegetation management, and he's been in various different roles in vegetation management for Eversource for the last 10 years, and he has a BS in forest operations science from the University of Maine. So thank you guys for taking the time this morning to be with us. I know I'm really eager to hear what you have to say.
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen here, so just bear with me a second. I can.
We can see that.
You can see it?
Yeah.
All right. I won't play with it anymore then. I'll just go with this. So good morning. Again, my name's Ian Farley. I'm a manager with Eversource in New Hampshire. Joining me today is Rick Sullivan, who is the supervisor of distribution in New Hampshire as well. I got a few slides to kick us off here. Kind of introduce Eversource and go over our program work and really, try to explain how the presence of emerald ash borer across all 3 states, specifically in New Hampshire, really has the ability to impact our program work negatively. So we're a tri-state company, which what that means is we cover 3 states. So that's Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. We're have just under 41,000 linear miles of circuits. We serve 500 different communities throughout our system. And when I say we're a 3-state company, what that means is we respond to events in all 3 states. You'll get a theme of my introduction here. One of our major pinch points in the utility to get all our work done is crew resources. Every year, we manage responses to major storm events, which we've started to see an increase in. And that's just not in New Hampshire. That's in Mass and Connecticut as well. So we have a lot of work planned each year. It takes just about 49 to 50 weeks of good working conditions for us to get the work completed. So when we have a big storm, like the major hurricane that impacted Connecticut back in 2020, and some of our vegetation crews were down there for almost a month, that really has a huge impact on us and our ability to get the work done. In New Hampshire, again, me and Rick are responsible for the distribution system. So that includes our scheduled maintenance trimming, enhanced tree trimming, where we're identifying zones, which we call the backbone. That's from a source, either a right-of-way or a substation, out to a protection device. And that's where the entire customer base for that particular circuit lives, you could say. Outside of that, we also have multiple reliability-based and annual hazard tree programs. We routinely maintain our distribution right-of-way system, which is about 650 miles across the state of New Hampshire. And then when we can, we have what we call a mid-cycle program, where we return back to circuits where we're seeing a lot of either tree failure or vegetation growth. And we'll deal with those circuits off cycle or mid cycle. So in New Hampshire, our normal clearance for distribution is between 15 and 20 feet above, 8 feet to the side, and 10 feet below. We're a regulated utility. So what that means is we trim our system every 4 to 5 years. We have a regulatory mandate that each circuit must be trimmed no later than 60 months, which is 5 years. So depending on where that circuit is located in the state, and how our annual plan is organized, we'll either be trimming those circuits once every 4 to 5 years. At the same time, to be as productive as possible while our crews are out trimming that circuit, we have a team of professional arborists who are assessing that circuit for hazard trees. And really the goal of our hazard tree program, or the historical goal of our hazard tree program, is basically we want to identify trees that have high risk to fail between the next cycle. So that means over the next 4 to 5 years. So when we trim a circuit on year one, let's say 2024, we want to go down through there. We want to trim out, get our clearances, and at the same time, we want to remove any of those hazard trees that have the ability to fail between now and the next time we're there. We have 8 primary contractors we use in New Hampshire. We've had to bring additional contractors in over the past couple of years just to be able to get our work done. So you can see them here. I won't go through all of them. We do have Lucas Tree that's based out of Maine. But again, the real pinch point for us as we plan our work each year, and this is where Emerald Ash Borer really has the ability to influence us in a negative way, is that it takes all of these contractors all year to get our scheduled maintenance work done. So when we run into a year with a lot of storms or a major nuisance such as emerald ash borer, which Rick is going to talk about, the direct impacts it's had on our system. It really becomes intricate, in how we strategize, getting the trimming work done, which is we're regulated to get that done through the New Hampshire Department of Energy. So it's quite the balancing game. And again, I'll let Rick touch on, really what EAB is doing to the system at large here in New Hampshire. Oh, I got one more slide. So this is a slide showing the tall native growing species. So these are the species we've historically targeted as part of our hazard tree program. Very common species for New Hampshire: red maple, birch, cherry, pine. Ash has always been on the list, but certainly, we've had to change our approach with how we assess and identify ash trees as part of our hazard tree removal work. Rick?
Thanks, Ian. I'll take over on this slide. What we can see here is a map of New Hampshire. And back in 2022, we started using an Esri ArcGIS platform to help manage all of our hazard tree work. The map is very busy. When you zoom in, it's much less so, but each triangle represents a tree that one of our arborists or profilers identified as hazardous or a good removal. What's notable is throughout the state, since 2022, we have 51,000 trees and 19,000 of them are ash trees. So this is by design. Some of the trees that we are identifying for removal aren't in severe decline, but we're purposely trying to be proactive because over time, as the decline of a given ash tree can be quite rapid, and it makes removing that ash tree more dangerous. It's also important for us to be proactive on our off-road sections where we can't necessarily get equipment. So if we see ash trees on an off-road stretch and we can get there, that would be our goal before that tree becomes too dangerous to climb. In the beginning, when ashes first started to become a problem back in 2012, 2013, people climbers would climb ash trees that were in decline. And nowadays they're much more reluctant to want to climb any given ash because they have shown the ability to fail down low at the trunk. But this is our overall view of the state, and it is alarming that 38% of our trees on this map are ash trees. For us, we've had good success getting permission to remove trees, but there are I think maybe 200 refusals throughout the state where these people say, no, my ash is going to be fine. And we'll visit them every 4 or 5 years, as Ian said, when we're back on cycle. But we are really trying to be proactive to get out there and remove these ash trees before they become dangerous for our lines, our people, and our tree crews. Next slide, Ian. This just shows the number of trees out there. Ash leads the way. Typically, if ash weren't a problem, we would expect to see maple and pine leading the charge out there. I know that pine trees cause most of our outages, and maples are right there with them. And right behind pines and maples that cause outages for us are oaks and ash trees. And this just shows basically the number of trees by species that currently are in our Esri system. Next slide. And then these down below, the bottom line are our area work centers. And you could see that Bedford, Keene, Tilton, and Newport have the most ashes on our lists. Newport, earlier we could see that Newport was green on the state's map, in terms of not having a long history of ash trees. But we do have some poor performing circuits in Newport, so that when we go out to do hazard trees, we're perhaps more proactive there to add ash trees to our lists as we're profiling those Newport circuits. But you can see towards the end there, Berlin, Chicoroa, Lancaster, those all have very few ash trees, and Portsmouth as well. I remember I used to, when I first came up to New Hampshire 7 years ago, we did remove a lot of ashes in Hooksett and Derry and Nashua. That was before our Esri platform was used. So we've been at it removing trees, since 2012, 2013, when they first showed up in Connecticut and New Hampshire. Next slide. So this is actually a picture from Connecticut, where I started my utility arborist career. And this is in Bethany, and it was one of the first hardest hit areas. And it happens to be close by to a tree contractor that did a lot of work in New York. So back in the day, people would whisper under their breath, "Oh, that must be this X contractor," because they're doing so much work in New York, and then coming back and the ash has followed their trucks, or in their chips and in their log trucks, and it started to spread here, in this case in Connecticut. And it's I guess very difficult to police and stop the spread of wood chips and wood. But just to mention, as soon as Eversource knew about emerald ash borer, all of our contractors were required and told to keep all wood chips on site and in the town where possible, and log movement of all log movement was restricted to a local nature. One other thing in this area in Bethany, when these ashes first became attacked, we did go out on this circuit. It was a 60-mile circuit, and we profiled all the ash trees that were over the lines that we felt were good removals for CLMP or Eversource to do. And on a 60-mile circuit, we identified over 600 ashes, on the roadside, very close to our lines. And if we extrapolate at 10 trees per mile, 10 ash trees per mile over our system, and if we have 40,000 miles at Eversource, that's 400,000 ash trees that could impact our system. And that's being somewhat conservative, because we're looking at trees that are within our trim zone, or between most of them 10 to 15 feet from our lines. But ash trees can be tall growing species, and a tree that's 60 feet away can also fail down low and cause outages. So even though we've identified in New Hampshire, we've identified 19,000 ash trees, New Hampshire has about 12,000 miles total. And if we follow that math of 10 trees per mile, we're looking at a potential of 120,000 ash trees that could affect our reliability. So we're constantly out there making new tree lists, looking for ashes and other hazard trees on our system. I think the next slide is back to you, Ian.
Sure, thanks, Rick. I did want to just jump back a few slides. So you can see here, Rick had mentioned our Bedford area work center, where as of today, we have almost 4,000 ash trees identified for removal. Just to give some people some context to that. So this is Concord. We don't have a lot of triangles here because it's actually served by a neighboring utility, Unitil. But just below that and around that is our Bedford area work center. So this is, in the previous discussion, they talked about Concord being kind of ground zero for emerald ash borer in New Hampshire. We have seen the impact of that discovery as far as the amount of trees that we're needing to constantly survey, assess, and sign up for permission and remove, right around that Concord area. Get caught up here. So again, Rick had talked about it, but it's worth mentioning again. When it comes to off-road operations, specifically our right-of-way work, it's really important for us to identify ash trees as soon as we can and try to be proactive with the removal. We have a few contractors that actually will not climb ash trees because of lessons learned getting into trees that have been compromised in the rest of the country. So when we're out there, we've always been, surveying. This picture, I think, is taken up in the Bethlehem, Lancaster area. We've always been targeting, larger pine trees that may have been uprooting from a recent windstorm, or, we certainly haven't been looking for ash trees as our number one target, but we've had to adapt to that, knowing that if an ash tree is in a tough spot for us as far as access, let's say it's out in like a wet area where we can't get equipment into, and historically we would have just climbed it, we're kind of losing that tool in what I would call our toolbox. So anywhere we can, when we're doing our hazard tree assessments, specifically on the off-road segments, we're really trying to make sure we take time to identify any ash that's there. And if there's any future possibility that work could have to be done manually or by a climber, I would suggest getting in there and proactively having it removed. Because when you go back there on the next cycle, which may be 4 or 5 years, that ash tree may no longer be stable or safe for someone to manually remove it. As we come through the 206 communities that we serve in New Hampshire, we're always trying to look for partnerships. We reach out to local leadership, whether that be the Department of Public Works. Some of our cities and towns have tree wardens, and they help us with our assessment throughout the town. They'll point out if there are, trees that are extremely hazardous, maybe above their scope as far as what they can take down with their municipal crews. And they ask us to kind of make an additional assessment there and see if there's something that could be done by means of having Eversource take the trees down. And we're always trying to put forth safety in everything that we do. So in many times we will partner with these municipalities and leadership. What's happening now as EAB continues to advance throughout New Hampshire, these communities that we serve, these requests for these type of emergent assessments have increased. And I'll remind everybody, like I said on an earlier slide, we're mandated by the Department of Energy to trim the system on a 4 to 5 year cycle. And it takes almost every crew that we have to accomplish that each year. So as we get onto a circuit and we're now being more proactive and aggressive with ash trees, and we're not, it's not like those other hazard trees, red maple, pine, have gone away. We still have to mitigate that risk as well. We're really losing our ability in many cases to be responsive to some of these community requests. It really takes everything we have just to get the circuits done that are scheduled for that year, where in the past, when we didn't have this massive influx of ash removal work, we may have been able to pull a few crews off and go over and work on some specific hazard trees for an abutting community that maybe we won't plan on being in that community based on our schedule for the next year or two. So we always like to be agile in the way that we can respond to community requests, but getting inundated with this emerald ash borer pest and what it's doing to the roadside forest is really, tying our hands in cases where we used to be able to move around a little bit easier. Some of the things that towns have done to help us, in mostly every town in New Hampshire, there's some form of required traffic control for our crews. So that is either a police officer, depending on the size of the road, or trained flaggers. So in some of these communities where ash has just been devastated, in an attempt to partner with us, communities have chose to either waive traffic control where it is safe to do so, and also sometimes not pass the cost of the traffic control onto Eversource or our contractors. In heavily infested communities, we're not looking to move the wood a lot. In many cases in New Hampshire, people are happy to keep the wood. They use it for firewood. But if we're taking down, a 30-inch ash tree on Main Street, that's a sidewalk tree, we can't leave the tree there. So we've looked to partner with communities, either set up wood disposal sites at DPW yards, or in a lot of cases in New Hampshire, we've been able to get in touch with what is called a wood bank. And that's where we can donate the wood and it's processed by some other entity, whether that be a church or some other community organization. And that wood is given away for free to people that need it for heating their homes in the winter months. But certainly, moving the wood around is not something that we want to be doing. Another thing in regards to wood removal is if the town has a log truck or they have a dump truck, in certain instances, if we take a town tree down, or we take a tree down that kind of the genesis of that removal was a community request, not only will the community help us out in potentially with the traffic control, but they'll take on the scope of removing the wood after. So that could be, a front end loader, that could be a dump truck, but anything that could be done to kind of lessen our load in the removal process just gives us more crew availability to do additional hazard tree work, either in that town or across the system. Another thing that communities have been great with is when we're coming into town and we're going to be doing a lot of trimming and we're going to be looking at ash trees in a proactive, aggressive nature. They've sometimes put up some public outreach and education on either Facebook or at the town hall, just talking about the fact that Eversource is in town. We're maintaining our lines, and as part of that work, we're actively trying to remove any hazardous trees that can impact our lines or the community, and maybe point out the fact that the town is seeing decline or dieback or death from emerald ash borers. So anytime we can build a partnership with the town, it really helps us out. And I'll leave this for questions. I do have a picture up here. I thought I would close with this. This picture looks that way because it was actually mailed to me by U.S. mail by a gentleman that lived in, I think it's Guilford, which is right south of Lake Winnipesaukee. And what happened was we'd been out ahead of trimming on this circuit. Our arborist team had been out identifying ash trees. And that is a unique ribbon that Eversource uses. It's white and blue. And we had tagged this ash tree in front of his house. And I think it was less than 2 weeks. So let's say between 7 and 10 days, the tree failed on a blue sky day. What we call a blue sky day is, I don't know what the weather is like where you are, but a day kind of like today, not a lot of wind, nothing you'd expect to be hazardous. The tree failed, and he was writing a handwritten letter to let us know that the tree was no longer standing. So, that's really what we're dealing with here. As fast as we can find some of these trees, they're failing on us. And then again, I had pulled something from, I think it's UNH, as far as a map goes, but that red area, those are those work centers that Rick had been referencing earlier, as far as what we call our Bedford area work center. That's right next to Manchester. And then, in my own experience, where I've seen EAB kind of migrating, it is north towards Lake Winnipesaukee, which would be at the top of that red area. And then over the past year or so, we've been doing a lot of trimming in what we call the eastern region. So I know a lot of you may not be familiar with this, but there's a road called Route 4 that kind of cuts eastward across the state and ends up in like the Farmington, Rochester area. And I have, personally seen an uptick in ash mortality, heading east out of the Manchester area towards what we call the Rochester Area Work Center. Are there any questions? I don't know if I can open the chat, but I'm happy to answer questions.
I'll read them off to you, Ian and Rick. And Rick has tackled a couple of them already in the chat. Jake, you can see your response from Rick in the chat on why spruce and fir are not listed on their list. I think without scrolling below, I will ask Eric's question here. Has the Nottingham and Wolfboro areas already passed? He didn't see those on your list.
So Wolfboro is actually a municipal electric company. So we feed them. They get their source from us, from what we call the 390 line. But that is completely municipal utility. So they're not associated with Eversource. So I'm not quite sure what Wolfboro Electric's strategy would be in regards to Emerald Ash Borer. The other town was Nottingham.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So that is right on what I was saying is kind of that Route 4 corridor. And that's really where I've been seeing a significant amount of ash death. As you go eastward from pretty much the Concord area, headed out towards, eventually you end up in like Rochester, Dover, Durham. But yes, we have trimmed, I believe it was last year in Nottingham, and part of that work was a significant amount of ash removals.
Great, thank you. Gary asks, have you had any or many ash tree related injuries over the last 10 years?
So we haven't, and I'll speak briefly, and then Rick, I'll let you give some feedback as well. I believe there was a close call that occurred in Connecticut where the crew was getting set up to climb an ash tree, and then either during that time or before they were on site, the ash tree failed And when anything like that happens, we consider it what we call a close call. So we bring safety in and kind of analyze it. Is there something that could have been done differently here? And, what we would term to be kind of the root cause analysis was that, ash trees really just structurally aren't safe to climb. Unless you can get a bucket to them, once they've gone into decline because of emerald ash borer, they become so fragile that it's not safe for our contractors to climb them. So that's why when you see a healthy ash tree in an area where you would expect that access may be a future limitation, I would urge you to make a firm assessment on whether that ash tree should be removed at that time or not.
Rick, did you
And I
want to
don't-
add anything?
Yeah, I do have one gory story about a guy that used to work for me in Connecticut did fall. He wasn't working for Eversource at the time, but before he came to work for us, he did, while removing an ash tree, did have a branch poke his eye out. So he's got one, he can see, he can drive, but he did lose one of his eyes while removing an ash tree. So it's just the dangers of removing any tree in a climbing situation, or tree work is inherently dangerous. But yeah, other than that, I don't know of any ash related injuries on our system.
And the thing about ash trees, the more I think about it, you look at them and you don't know what they're going to do. In a lot of cases, they're so dead that you would think that it's probably just going to crumble apart, and you're not going to get, what we call that full tree fallen event, where either all or most of the tree is falling all at once. But then we do see that, where a large ash tree either is letting loose what we call a leader, that could be 16-inch in diameter, or a large ash tree just completely failing at the base. So, once the ash tree is completely compromised like that, it becomes very hard to predict, if it fails, how it's going to fail. And that's what really brings up all the red flags in regards to safety.
Great, thank you. Katie has her hand up. I'm going to switch over to that. And just a reminder to folks, if you do want to ask a question, you can feel free to use the chat or you can raise your hand.
Thanks, Jan. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Ian and Rich for this presentation. So for those of you on the call who don't know me, my name is Katie Menendi. I am the manager of veg management for Central Maine Power. And really what Eversource is doing is very similar to what we're doing from a maintenance level and a hazard tree perspective level on our system here. And as Jan mentioned, 2018 was the detection point for ash in Maine in our southernmost service territory. And we're really in those, kind of scrambling stages now in terms of trying to really catch up with all the trees that have been rapidly failing in that southern part of the state. And, Ian's example of the tree that was marked and then 2 weeks later it was down. We're seeing that quite a bit, and then doing that proactive strategy in other regions where EAB really hasn't firmly taken a strong hold yet, but really trying to work hard to work with our private landowners and our town partners to remove those trees from the system. So I thought the presentation was great and really informative for folks who aren't as accustomed to working with the utility side of the house. So just want to say thank you.
Great. Thanks, Katie, for coming on and saying that. Yeah, I wanted to applaud you also for mentioning the partnerships and how communities can support the utilities and your contractors. I thought those were really great suggestions and very applicable here in Maine too. One of the things you mentioned being traffic control. That's oftentimes one of those issues that we hear a lot about, that our State Department of Transportation or the utilities can't deal with mitigating these hazards because they can't get contractors to do the traffic control for them. So really helpful suggestion there. I do have one other question from Eric here. When you identify large numbers of ash on larger ownerships, have you considered contacting or contracting landowners and foresters to remove some or all of those trees utilizing commercial timber harvesting?
So some of our primary contractors have commercial land clearing divisions. They don't just work on the utility side, they do large scale land clearing as well. So on some of our larger scale projects on the off-road, we would, be bringing in feller bunchers, forwarders, grapple skidders. We haven't seen that quite yet, primarily due to forest composition. You don't see pockets of ash like that. A lot of times when along the roadside primary system, the type of specialized equipment we're bringing in is cranes, because the trees become so brittle, and unpredictable, that there's an element of safety involved by using a crane. And then, of course, we have to work with our line department to we have to put cover up on the lines, and it's quite the process. But yeah, I'm not sure if I answered that question, but I guess when we're dealing with a large population of ash, the most common specialized equipment that we're using is probably a crane setup.
Yeah, I think.
I would just,
go ahead,
I
Rick.
would just add that for a lot of logging projects that happen near our lines, loggers tend to leave a mohawk or thin strip of trees closest to our lines, because they don't want to operate their feller bunchers closer to the wire. So with safety in mind, they tend to limit their logging operations. And we often are called in after a large logging operation to identify and mitigate some fewer remaining hazard trees. But we're always looking for opportunities to partner with towns, homeowners, anyone that's willing to take on this burden to help us out in handling these hazard trees.
Really good point there, Rick. And Eric just points out in the chat that his company that he works for did some preemptive removal for one of the towns in our in York County, in the town of Alfred, where they did a fair amount of removals on some town properties ahead of those trees dying. And I would say, Eric, that would be the way to do it, so you're avoiding the situation that Ian's mentioning, where you've got trees that are brittle and too far gone, that near the utility with that type of equipment, that those really are just crane trees. And obviously when you're bringing in equipment like cranes, you're talking about a much greater expense for removing those trees too. So we've been doing these calls for quite a few years now, and really all with the intent that municipal tree management folks that are working with them start thinking about how you're going to manage your ash before it dies. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. You guys, that was super informative. Thank you so much for being with us today. I think you've left us with a lot to think about. So we will move on to the final portion of our program. We've got Mike Parisio, forest entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, that's going to update us on anything that we need to know going on in Maine. So take it away, Mike.
Okay, am I sharing full screen in presenter mode?
I see that, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. And yeah, thanks to all our New Hampshire guests for those great presentations. So yeah, we'll come back locally to Maine here, and I'll give you an update on some things that happened last year that might still be news to people as we head into to this year, and then yeah, give an overview of some of our monitoring techniques and activities that we'll be undertaking in 2024. So we'll hop right into it. If I can advance, there we go. So yeah, I'm going to run through some symptomology real quick for people on the line. A lot of the management activities that we've talked about really do rely on having good information on where EAB is present. So yeah, main goal of our monitoring program is to keep that information up to date and accurate and make sure we're getting that information out to people that need to know. So again, a lot of that comes through you. So I'll talk about first woodpecker damage. And this is one of the most obvious signs of EAB infestation on an ash tree. When you have these levels of really heavy woodpecker damage, and I'm jealous of Rick's picture there from Connecticut. That's one of the best woodpecker damage and blonding scenes I've ever seen. So nice photo there. But anyways, this is, getting more and more common in areas of southern Maine for sure. But we do see it in some of the other satellite infestations we've picked up. So I bring this up now because this usually kind of manifests in late winter, and that's when we get a lot of our detections and reports from woodpecker damage. So we're about to kind of lose that advantage as the other trees begin to leaf out here. So this can certainly still be honed in on year round if you're, up close and personal with a tree, but we're going to kind of lose our ability to kind of see this when you're driving. It can be quite obvious. So again, a very useful detection tool there. And if you see stuff like this, please call it into us. Taking things a step further, so for those that are actually handling, ash logs, firewood, things like that, if you have any suspicions about whether a tree might have EAB in it and you're able to, you can remove some of the outer bark and take a closer look inside the tree. So sometimes, if you look at that picture on the left, you can see this done for you by woodpeckers out in the woods. But otherwise, yeah, just taking, a log or firewood and peeling back, you can kind of get a closer look at what's going on underneath. And on the next slide here, we have some, more fine scale images of emerald ash borer galleries. So one of the interesting things about all this survey work is now that we get so many reports of EAB, a lot more people report some of our native borers that affect ash trees. So I've seen lots of great examples of galleries caused by other native insects, but this is just to remind people that emerald ash borer galleries are quite distinct. So you're going to want to look for that serpentine or S-shaped pattern beginning all the way at the beginning of the gallery, right when these larvae begin to tunnel as young larvae all throughout. So a couple different examples there, but again, always be focused on that back and forth pattern, and they're quite organized. So the larvae themselves are pretty unique. You may or may not encounter them depending on how close you're working with ash, but again, some simple characteristics that can help you distinguish them from some of our other native borers. Like I mentioned, they're quite flat in profile. The segments themselves are bell-shaped at the right stage. Then they have these two small black protrusions on the back end that are unique to emerald ash borer. So again, if you encounter any larvae at all in ash trees and you're not sure what it is, please take a picture and send it our way, and we will do that identification work for you and figure out if we have a positive emerald ash borer ID. A lot of people remember this tool, so this can be useful, again, depending on how close you're handling, ash. So yes, the exit holes of the adult beetles are quite D-shaped in profile, so you can see some examples there. Yeah, bear in mind, I think people will find that any exit hole you find in an ash tree can look D-shaped if you look at it from the right angle. So again, this is one of those things. Try to take some pictures and send it our way, and we'll help with that final diagnostic work. So again, We're trying to keep very close information or location information on emerald ash borer's whereabouts in Maine. So if you see any of those symptoms, please send them our way. Take lots of pictures, reach out. foresthealth@maine.gov is the easiest way to get a hold of us, and we'll follow up on those and keep our map as updated and precise as possible. So I'll go over some of 2023's monitoring programs results real quick, and I'll focus more on some of these in other slides. But just to kind of set the scene here, this map on the right shows, all the combined different types of monitoring we do presently for emerald ash borer. So whether that's purple prism traps, girdle trap trees, green funnel traps, biosurveillance, and then some of the management side is in biological control. So again, we are working statewide, both in areas that, are near infested areas and also in, kind of remote areas that we're just monitoring to make sure nothing shows up unexpected. So and then, that's what the 2023 program looked like. So going forward in 2024, again, we'll continue our purple prism trap program. We'll continue our girdle trap tree program, both in, central and southern Maine and northern Maine. We'll be doing more green funnel traps than usual this year. We're going to have about 30 of those. We'll continue biosurveillance, visual survey. We'll continue to rely on public reports. We'll continue our biological control releases like Bill talked about. And then, I didn't include a slide on it, but as Bill mentioned too, we'll be emulating some of the small scale insecticide protection treatment programs to protect some of that ash seed source and keep that seed bank viable after EAB moves through Maine. So again, purple prism traps, we usually hang about 200 of these. You can see the typical locations, for example, from 2023 in that map on the right there. So last year we had 197. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we just did not have any positive traps, depending on where we hung those. So we will repeat this program in a similar fashion this year at many of these locations again. As I mentioned, green funnel traps, similar to purple prism traps in the way they're utilized. They're a little bit better in some applications. So yes, it depends on the year how many of these we used. We've used quite a bit in past years. Last year we didn't rely on them too much. We only had 4 sites in northern Maine, but here in 2024 we will increase our numbers again. We'll have about 30 green funnel traps around the state in addition to our purple prism trap program. Biosurveillance, I'll just mention real quick. Again, this is relying on some native predatory wasps that actually hunt beetles related to emerald ash borer, and when emerald ash borer moves into an area, they will actually go after them as well. So you can see in this photo here on the right, I believe this picture is also from Connecticut back in the day, but here's one of the adult wasps that's captured an adult emerald ash borer and is bringing it back to a burrow to lay an egg on to provision larvae with. So again, we recover quite a few beetles from this program. Last year we recovered 273. Again, and those are all relatives of emerald ash borer because this wasp relies on that overall group for food. So despite having all those beetles to look at, we did not recover emerald ash borer using this technique last year. Girdle trap trees. So again, this is kind of a more effective method. So we use this kind of closer to infested areas to monitor for spread. So this involves going out and artificially injuring a tree in the spring to make it more attractive to any female emerald ash borer that might be in the area and looking to deposit eggs on a unhealthy tree. So last year, again, we had about 50 trees. None of those were positive except in areas that we were looking for biocontrol sites. So so if you look at this number 47, so the 42 trees we expected to not be positive were not positive, and the 5 trees we expected to be positive were positive. So here's the program for 2024. As you can see, again, we kind of focus on the outskirts of generally infested areas or potentially infested areas. So, especially in southern and central Maine here, we're trying to monitor growth of these satellite infestations here. So, it's a fun program. Yes, we're always keeping track of firewood. So I'll just remind folks on the line, I think we have some New Hampshire people tuning in as well. So all out-of-state firewood except certified heat treated is banned from Maine. It's the same for New Hampshire. So yes, we always look for firewood interceptions each year. This is one from Memorial Day of last year. You can see visibly infested wood and the remains of an adult beetle in a load of firewood coming from Pennsylvania. So look out for that. We flagged our borders, our major roads where we pass into New Hampshire and Canada with signs like these to remind folks that out-of-state movement is prohibited here in Maine. Again, probably the most important monitoring tool we have is public reporting. So that's why we share all these, signs and symptoms with you, so you can, have these familiar to you and call them into us. And yeah, that's how we get a lot of our information on new positive finds. So it's obviously more effective to have the whole state looking for emerald ash borer in new locations and helping us out than our limited manpower. So. Biological control now, switching over to the management side. So yeah, as Bill mentioned, Maine has an ongoing biological control program as well as most of the states in the eastern half of the continental U.S. now. So we've been releasing soon after our initial detections. We'll be establishing several new sites in 2024. And again, part of the reason for that is that we've been able to document established populations at some of our old release sites that we released at for several years. So yes, we were kind of gratified this year with some positive recoveries of the biological control agents in a couple of our sites in Chapley, Acton, and Leamington. So that's great. Again, that shows, we are able to get these natural controls established on the landscape. And once we do, we can move on to new sites. So yeah, we'll continue to release at new sites as we can and let the biological controls do their job in sites where they're established already. And then, yeah, I'll just wrap up with some regulatory changes. So again, these all happened in December of 2023, but they might people might just be hearing about them for the first time in this call. So I'll just, give a quick update here. So, yeah, late 2023, we did have some major revisions, and I'll show closer images of northern and southern Maine here. And that was due to a lot of satellite infestations that sprung up. So here over in northern Oxford County, this one in Waterville, and then up in Corin and Newport. So yeah, in response to those regulated area or those detections, we had to expand our regulated zones. Fortunately, the most recent infestation that's kind of most central into Maine and Herman here did not extend beyond our newly established regulatory boundary in blue. That happened, almost immediately after we expanded those boundaries. So fortunately, it did not create a problem there. And yeah, I'll show you, like I said, some maps. Obviously, you can see the difference here. Both southern Maine and northern Maine detected EAB in 2018 for the first time, and you can see the extent of both natural and perhaps human-mediated spread in southern Maine versus northern Maine. So again, here's what the situation looks like in northern Maine. So still a very relatively small regulated area. Again, each one of these red points, there's a positive EAP detection at the center of it. That's a 3-mile buffer zone. From our experience and from experience elsewhere, usually within that 3-mile area, there's a pretty good probability that there's a population of EAB that's probably just under the threshold of being detectable. And then this orange zone, that's a 10-mile buffer. So again, there is certainly possibility that EAB is already in that area at very low population levels that aren't detectable, but it's no guarantee. So those are kind of the thresholds we present to people. So, if you're in the red zone, you definitely need to be, executing your management plan. And yeah, if you're in an orange zone, you should be getting ready to certainly have your management plan in place and be ready to execute it. So that's the northern Maine situation. And then yeah, we'll just fast forward to southern Maine here. So as you can see, again, yeah, we share some of these points in common with the natural spread of the advanced front just coming from New Hampshire. So yeah, a lot of these other things though are more questionable. We've had some major jumps into the central part of the state. So again, the question is whether those were accidental movements of regulated items by people that helped establish new populations of emerald ash borer. But yeah, this is the situation we're looking at. Again, this blue boundary, the regulated zone, no regulated ash articles are permitted to leave that boundary. Within these boundaries, regulated ash articles should move the shortest distances possible, despite the fact that you can legally move them anywhere within the regulated zones. And yeah, like I said, we are very interested in keeping these points, as updated as possible. To kind of fill in some of these gaps if there is EAB. But yeah, last point I'll make is even though this area is regulated, a lot of this area is still emerald ash borer free, all these blue zones where you don't see red or orange. So that's what we're hoping to protect. There's a lot of ash in those areas, and yeah, we'll continue to regulate while there's a need, and that's all I have. So I will also take questions if anybody has any.
Great, thank you, Mike. I want to add again, if your name doesn't show up in the registration list, please pop your name into the chat so we have record of you. As well as if you're sitting in with somebody else and their name is on there, please pop your name in the chat. When we are finished here, Amy's gonna drop the quiz into the chat for your credits. Thank you. I don't see any questions, although no, Lloyd Erland, you can unmute yourself and ask your question if you want. I can't hear you, Lloyd. I'm not sure if you've unmuted yourself.
Do you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yep.
Hi there. A wonderful program here. I'm just delighted that I took the time to look into it. The next thing I'm going to do is get on the phone call to I'm from Maine right here. Next time I'm going to do is get on the phone and talk to one of our people about recommending that he get a look at it, and that we maybe begin to be more progressive ourselves on this. But the question I had was, if you look ahead 20, 30 years from now, you'll see two things. You'll see an awful lot of trees that hang over the power line. I don't think there's any way we'll ever catch up. And you see forecasts of climate change. And between all those things, can you expect that this problem is just going to get worse?
Are you going to take that one, Mike, or team effort here?
I thought the question was about utilities. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Oh, I asked the question, looking 20 to 30 years into the future, between the large number of trees that are already out there that are overhanging the power lines and that are in danger of causing a problem, and then adding to that the effect of climate change, you could expect this situation to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, as far as as far as emerald ash borer is concerned, I don't think, in this particular instance, we even need to bring in the complication or magnification of climate change. That has all sorts of effects on other things. But as we've learned from, experiences throughout, the country, and yeah, having New Hampshire on here as a direct comparison to Maine, so like New Hampshire's been dealing with emerald ash borer for about 10 years. Maine's been dealing with it for about 5 years. And, there's a 10-year, mortality curve that has been established, pretty much in the upper Midwest where EAB existed for the longest time. So, and New Hampshire's at that point. So, yeah, over the next 5 years, we'll certainly be experiencing a lot more mortality. When you get into your 20 to 30-year range from now, we can all safely assume that emerald ash borer will probably exist throughout all of Maine at that point, and will probably have run its course or be close to running its course, and that 10-year cycle at the last place it winds up. So again, that's kind of the idea of what we're trying to achieve here by, protecting seed source, documenting, lingering ash and stuff. We're not at that point yet in Maine, but once we get there, we certainly will be establishing biological controls. So yeah, a lot of it remains to be determined in the upper Midwest. They've done these same, management activities and principles as well. They're starting to get a real handle on what the future forest looks like, because they've, had emerald ash borer for, probably not, beyond the first detection in 2022, probably 30 years, say it was there for 10 years or 5 years, whatever you want to say. So yeah, we're going to learn a lot more probably within the next 5 to 10 years too, from the upper Midwest about what we might look to experience here in Maine. But long story short is, yeah, there will be a unprecedented amount of ash mortality. Unfortunately, it's just a matter of how fast it happens.
I think Katie's got her hand up to maybe tackle that from the utility perspective too. But Katie, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, Lloyd, to answer your question, it's definitely something that we're looking at, and it is going to be a significant concern for the utility. Right now, on top of our hazard tree patrols, we're moving to a ground to sky program over our 3-phase to help combat not only ash mortality, but as I think Ian or Rick mentioned, pine trees are also a leading cause of outages. So trying to lift that overhead canopy, both from the mortality standpoint on ash and pine failure and climate change, and seeing a more increase of more frequent and severe storm damage. But some of that will be, again, limited to landowner consent, because most of the trees are rooted on private property, and to do that aerial overhead trimming, it would require a significant modification to that tree, or you'd be removing the entire canopy in full and just leaving a stem. So those trees do need to be formally permissioned, and we do need to get consent from the private property owner in order to do that work. So we're in that beginning stage of, at least on the ground to sky part of it, really reaching out to these landowners who are in that space, where having those conversations of, yes, this tree may not look hazardous right now, but in a year or two, you will see that rapid decline. And, a few more years on top of that, that tree is more than likely going to fail. But also from the utility perspective, on the tree side, we're looking at putting in larger class size poles and larger conductor to help reduce reliability impacts from like your smaller branch breakage falling down onto like a bare coated wire, which would cause a fault. Putting in more tree conductor and things like that. So we're looking at it from a lot of different angles.
One thing that's really striking to me and learning from this presentation is how brittle the dead trees can be. That had not been brought to my attention, and that makes it much more complicated, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, Lloyd, certainly we've been talking about that in the urban forestry realm, for arborists, and their safety. But it is a known fact that ash trees infected with EAB are more brittle than an ash tree that died of other causes. So we are at past noon now. There is one last question, Allison, I think maybe you can tackle. Can this ash basal area data be accessed by the public as a layer in GIS? And it looks like Mike's answered that in the chat. So again, a reminder, if you're looking for credits, the link to the MS Forms quiz is in the chat. You want to take that quiz before midnight tomorrow in order to receive the credits. And I want to thank everybody, our presenters for taking the time. Very informative program today. And I know I've taken away quite a lot of notes and really engaged attendees too. So thank you for taking time this morning and enjoy the rest of your day.